You're tuned in to the Bleav in Arizona podcast. Hello, Bear Down Believers, and welcome into the show. Week 0 is now almost in the books, and what a welcome back party for college football. 2 epic games that we'll talk about today, one involving Arizona's first opponent of the season, New Mexico, and the other involving a top 10 team going down across the pond in Ireland. Welcome into the Bleav in Arizona podcast. I'm your host, Matt Reynoldson. And before we get to our content on today's show, I want to remind you to please follow and subscribe to the show over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts, as well as the video versions that'll be up on my YouTube page at Matt_Reynoldson. That's Bleav in Arizona, BLEAV in Arizona. Make sure you give each one of those audio clips, each one of those shows a play for me. All right, what an incredible day of college football that we saw. And it just kind of gets your appetite going for the start of the season, right? You know, you see this incredible back and forth game between New Mexico and Montana State. You see all the fanfare in Ireland surrounding Georgia Tech's massive upset of Florida State. And we'll talk about both, but just a really fun, exciting way to kick off what I believe could be one of the best college football seasons ever and set the stage for this new era of college football. As we enter conference realignment, as we enter the 12-team playoff, everything is on the table this year in college football. And now we'll see what sets the stage for it, because week 0 was one heck of an appetizer in college football. All right. Arizona's first opponent, New Mexico, opening up at home today against FCS Power Montana State. And the betting line was a little bit of an head turner, I should say, because Montana State was a 13.5-point favorite on the road at New Mexico. This is a New Mexico program that hasn't been a slouch in the Mountain West over the years, and Montana State plays FCS football. So you would think that, New Mexico would at least be a slight favorite at home. Nope, a 13.5-point underdog. That's worth 2 touchdowns. So new head coach Bronco Mendenhall, speaking to his roster full of 42 transfers and going up against a team that returned 20 starters from a team that made a deep run in the FCS playoffs last year, Bronco Mendenhall was saying, hey, Vegas doesn't respect you. They don't respect you. They're listing you as a 2-touchdown dog to this Montana State team. And boy, did New Mexico respond early on in this game. Just the first offensive drive for the Bobcats, New Mexico had a rush on 2nd and 10, 2 linebackers stunt on a delayed blitz, 1 inside linebacker stunts late, and then 1 outside linebacker converges on the outside on a 2nd and 10 play drop back for Montana State, forced a strip sack fumble, scoop and score, 40-yard return for a touchdown. New Mexico was on the board 7-0. Later in the quarter, continuing to stifle things on defense. They had the turnover on Montana State's first drive. On Montana State's third drive, they forced a turnover on downs. So New Mexico building an easy 10-0 lead after the first quarter. And then 1 minute into the second quarter, quarterback Devin Dampier finding the end zone again. So to make it 17-0 New Mexico right out of the gate, and really making an impact early on in that game. Now, Dampier could be a very interesting matchup for Arizona because of what he does as both a runner and a passer. His first half line was really pretty impressive. He was 13 of 18, had over 150 yards, had a passing touchdown, had another rushing touchdown in helping New Mexico put 24 points on the board. But this is a team with a lot of transfers. This is a team that doesn't have the continuity of a coaching staff or familiarity with schemes. So you knew they were in kind of a precarious position in week 0, especially against a team that brought so much back and knew exactly what they were. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise when Montana State scored 2 unanswered touchdowns to make it 17-14 in the second quarter. But just before half, New Mexico got one back, made it 24-14 heading into the locker room. Lobos feeling good at home. Second half, does lightning strike twice? And if lightning strikes twice, how do you lose? We'll get to that in a minute. But lightning did strike twice, because there was a second scoop and score for the Lobos defense. The pass rush was all over the field today. Both of the scoop and scores came on strip sacks. So 2 fumble recovery touchdowns for New Mexico's defense gave the Lobos a 31-14 lead at home. And you really felt like this game might have been over with 6:15 left. New Mexico forced yet another turnover on downs for Montana State, taking over with the ball in plus territory, up 31-21. Well, New Mexico, with this inexperienced roster of playing together, with the new coaching staff, with, as I've mentioned ad nauseum, 42 transfers, did what an inexperienced team does and let small mistakes pile up. So after holding the ball for just a little bit, bleeding the clock inside 5 minutes, there was a big drop, and New Mexico eventually had to punt it back away to Montana State. Montana State takes over at its own 7-yard line. So, that's a lot of real estate to cover in just 4.5 minutes, much less to cover and score twice. Well, Montana State does it in one play, a 93-yard touchdown run. Montana State standing in this shadow of its own goal line, reeling off that long touchdown run and then making it 31-28. So, okay, New Mexico on their heels just a little bit, only a 3-point lead, got to execute. Dampier puts one on his receiver's hands on a third down pass with just about 2 minutes left. That one's dropped. So a punt goes back to Montana State, again starting in the shadow of their own goal line, inside their own 10. And the Bobcats engineer just this lethal attack, just down the field, nickel, dime, short, intermediate passing game, just bleeding every last bit of effort out of the Lobos until Montana State eventually scored the game-winning touchdown with 10 seconds left, finishing with 14 unanswered points in the final 4.5 minutes of this game, ripping the hearts out of New Mexico and beating the Lobos 35-31 in Albuquerque. Now, what does this mean for Arizona? Well, it means they're going to see, no pun intended for the wolf thing, but a wounded dog coming into Arizona Stadium next week. Because when you give up over 350 rush yards, like New Mexico did to Montana State today, and you have a win in your grasp after 2 fumble recovery touchdowns, and you let it go, and it kind of fizzles out from there, that's really hard to come back from emotionally, especially before going on the road against a top 25 team. Look, we've heard from assistant coaches for Arizona for the past 2 weeks that this is a dangerous spot to face New Mexico in because a team makes its biggest improvement from game 1 to game 2. But there's a lot of emotions that go on with college athletes early on in the season. And with guys that haven't played a lot of football together, they've played a lot of football, but haven't played a lot of football together. That's a really tough spot to come back from and regroup and go on the road against a top 25 team in Arizona, number 21, that will beat you up in the trenches a little bit, that will get after you on the outside. These receivers aren't going to be able to run free. Dampier is going to not have as much time to throw as he might have today against Montana State. So it makes it a very tough matchup for New Mexico in that realm. And it makes it a very unique opportunity for Arizona. Look, we all know, as observers of the Wildcats, that the season essentially starts September 13th, a Friday night game in Manhattan, Kansas, a non-conference game, but the unofficial introduction into the Big 12 against a top 25 Kansas State team. You win that, you're a legit playoff contender as an at-large, not just Big 12, as an at-large. And then 2 weeks later, after a bye week on the 21st, you go to Utah, the preseason conference favorite in the Big 12. So 2 massive opportunities very early on for Arizona. And with both of those games, to be able to turn those into a fourth quarter game, Arizona's going to need to be able to run the football. Arizona's going to need to be able to establish the game in the trenches. So while the coaching staff may be a little nervous that New Mexico may have a week to self-scout and lick their wounds a little bit and get better, New Mexico has a lot of issues that Arizona could exploit. And Arizona exploiting those issues with this next game plan could pay dividends down the road throughout this long season. If Arizona rushes the ball in any similar way to what Montana State did against this team, and look, Montana State has a future pro lineman, but probably only one of them, maybe 2. Arizona has a potential first-round draft pick at right tackle in Jonah Savanaya as a returning all Pac-12 conference left guard. in Wendell Moe, super senior center, Josh Baker, guy who's played a lot of football at guard, and Ryan Stewart. And if Ryan Stewart can't go there, Leif Magnuson will. The only real question mark is a redshirt freshman at left tackle in Rhino Tapa Atotai. But how much does it build the confidence of this group playing real meaningful snaps together for the first time, even for all the guys returning, but real meaningful snaps together for the first time, that they can just pin their ears back, put their hand in the ground, and just road grade for a little bit? And, oh yeah, this may not have been the case coming out of spring, or it may have been less of the case coming out of spring, but Arizona now has a running back room that can hit you in the teeth. I mean, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, who transferred from, ironically, New Mexico, is going to be the number 1 back for the Wildcats. And he's a guy that gets up the field, runs between the tackles, and can break off runs like we saw Montana State break off that 93-yard running crunch time today. So he can break free. Quali Conley has shown a lot of the same skill set as Krosky-Merritt. But also what Quali Conley is able to do is get out of the backfield, catch the ball out of the backfield, make the short passing game an extension of the run game. Who's your number 3? Oh, Kendrick Riscano, the Ole Miss transfer who had an amazing fall camp and was hitting people in the teeth. Everybody felt number 3 coming through the hole. Everybody. There was a great moment in practice earlier in camp when Riscano met Gunnar Maldonado, the veteran safety for the Wildcats, in the second level and trucked Maldonado. Now, Maldonado got him back later in practice, but that sends a message. So with these 3 backs and Rayshon Speedy Luke and potentially Caden Luke at fullback in some of these heavier sets, that interior of New Mexico's defense, the inside linebackers, the interior defensive line is going to take a lot of shots in the teeth. So I don't think we need to see Arizona throw the ball a lot in this first game. I don't think we need to see situations where Fafita's in straight dropbacks and really testing the metal of Rhino at left tackle. I don't really think that, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for New Mexico to do what they had a lot of success with today, which was crafty interior rushes, getting to the quarterback off the edge, delayed blitzes, things like that. Because I don't mean to make Dino Babers' game plan for him, the Arizona offensive coordinator, but I'm thinking that it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. You run it up the gut, you bruise them a little bit, you kill them with the short passing game, then you take the shots when you feel like taking the shots. That's one of the luxuries of Arizona's offense when it comes to run first. If they go run first, is they can go with these heavy sets and they can pick and choose when they can take a shot with their superstar quarterback and the best wide receiver in the country running a fly route. Or perhaps the best JUCO transfer maybe in the country in the slot underneath in Jeremiah Patterson. Or perhaps a returning starter and a guy who's seen a lot of football in Montana, Lamonius Craig, on a deep sideline route. Arizona can pick their spots for not just this week, but the next 2 weeks against teams that it should be able to run the ball against. And I think if Arizona is able to establish that on offense, they could make these pretty quick outings. And I know that maybe the TV broadcast people are somewhat hoping for that because their 7:30 local time starts 10:30 Eastern. So Big 12 After Dark, welcome back to Tucson. It's not over yet. That's a 7:30 p.m. kickoff on ESPN next weekend for the season opener. Now, defensively, it all comes down to stopping the quarterback. Devin Dampier is a Scottsdale Saguaro grad, true sophomore quarterback for the Lobos, and has really dialed in, his ability to be a strong athlete and a dual threat quarterback. He's good with his feet, gets out of the pocket, keeps his eyes downfield. He will take the deep shots. But I like Arizona's safety play enough, especially the rover safeties, when it comes to guys that can, drop back in coverage. I'm talking Gunnar Maldonado, Dalton Johnson, and to some extent on that, wherever Traden Stukes plays, but also to some extent on that in the dollar package, maybe an Owen Goss. New Mexico will take its deep shots because Dampier can really get air underneath the ball. He's got a good, strong arm, showed some touch on a couple deep balls today, puts it in the right spot. But the intermediate throws were a problem for New Mexico today. They weren't able to connect on very many of them. They weren't able to connect when it mattered on most of them. So I think this is a good opportunity for Arizona to develop its pass rush, know that it's not going to get beat with this secondary. It's not going to get beat on some of those outs, on some of those intermediate outs. And Dwayne Aquina, and by extension, linebackers coach Danny Gonzalez, can really craft this pass rush in a way that showcases different guys this next week. But I think also at the same time, you're going to need to have a spy on a guy like Dampier, because we haven't seen, a lot of this defense when it comes to, okay, who's the spy? Jacob Manu is your inside linebacker. He makes the most sense as the spy, but he's so valuable. He's such a valuable chess piece on this defense that you got to be able to move him around. So do you keep him as a spy? Do you make the off-ball inside linebacker the spy in like a Tay Brown or a Kamuela Kayahue or a Leviticus Sua, somebody like that? Do you keep them in as a spy, or do you make the outside linebacker in a Justin Flo type or a Sterling Lane type the spy of the quarterback? I think you need to have those sets available, because if not, it'll be play breaks down, four-man rush may not get home or may get home, and Dampier steps out of the pocket and kills you on a quarterback scramble. I think that's the way that New Mexico can beat Arizona's defense a little bit and turn this into a little bit more of a high-scoring affair than Arizona would want. So we'll get a really good look at what Arizona's defensive line is this coming week, how the Wildcats will spy mobile quarterbacks, which they'll need to do with Avery Johnson week 3 against Kansas State. Cam Rising, not quite as mobile for Utah, especially coming off the injury. But, Avery Johnson's a 4-4 guy, 4-3 guy, potentially, is what they say within that program. So the Kansas State quarterback is somebody you certainly need to prepare for. And Dampier will be a very good training ground 2 weeks ahead of that game in Manhattan. So Arizona can learn a lot about itself in week 1, but I think it learned a lot about New Mexico in week 0. And emotionally, I've talked about it a couple minutes ago in this podcast. Emotionally, for this New Mexico team coming in, it's going to be really hard to just lick your wounds after giving up 350 plus yards on the ground and giving up a late 2-touchdown lead to Montana State and having your heart ripped out at home in those torrential winds. It's going to be really tough for New Mexico to bounce back coming to Arizona Stadium, but they do have a game of film underneath them. They do have a good coach, a good experienced coach. So maybe they find a way to emotionally bounce back and come into Arizona Stadium with some fire. But I'm going to predict that when Arizona throws the first real heavy top 25 punch that we know Arizona will throw, I don't think New Mexico's going to be in the ring for a 10-round fight, if you will. Season opener next Saturday, 7:30 at Arizona Stadium, the late game on ESPN. That's certainly exciting. Oh, the early game on ESPN today really gave us the full appetizer for the college football season. That was Florida State and Georgia Tech. And boy, the storylines coming into this one were epic. And really, several years of this Dublin game, the Aer Lingus Classic, I believe it's called, is they all kind of come together around this game, this week 0 game of teams that feel fairly underprepared, that don't really know what they have. Florida State brought in a ton of transfers. A couple years ago, Nebraska had that infamous loss to Northwestern, the onside kick up 11 in the third quarter. Notre Dame's played over there. Kansas State plays over there next year. This Dublin always provides something weird. Well, today provided absolutely the most memorable result for this classic. And it was an incredible performance by Georgia Tech, because they beat up Florida State in the run game. And all these ballyhooed defensive line transfers for Florida State, all their athletes on the outside, a new quarterback in DJ Uiagalelei, who a lot of you may have seen play in Arizona Stadium last year as a member of the Oregon State Beavers, now transferring back into the ACC. DJU, the former Clemson quarterback, former #1 quarterback out of California, 5-star in his class, that was actually ranked above CJ Stroud. And a lot of expectations coming in for Florida State this year. Look, the Seminoles were without a doubt snubbed from the playoff last year. They deserved to be in, even with the Jordan Travis injury. You go 13-0, you deserve a shot at the national championship if you play a Power 5 schedule. And they beat LSU, so even better than a Power 5 schedule. Beat LSU and Florida in non-conference games and ran through their conference undefeated. While they may have deserved to get in, They were not one of the best 4 teams last year. I think Alabama proved that in the Rose Bowl with their battle against eventual national champion Michigan. And I think today proved a lot of that as well. I think Brent Key, the Georgia Tech head coach, who is a master at covering as an underdog, purely outcoached Mike Norvell at Florida State. I think even with last year's magical run, I don't think we've truly seen, is Mike Norvell in the elite upper echelon of college football coaches? I don't know. He's had 1 year, one good year. Florida State has been disappointing for years and years and years on top of that. So is he the right guy? Is he not? I mean, probably. One game doesn't change the fact that Mike Norvell is a good coach, but elite, that's a question now. Brent Key fully outcoached Florida State in this game. And it started a lot of the way that you might have expected it to start. FSU roaring out of the gates, getting downhill, getting 11 points on the board very early on, building a quick 8-0 lead, going for 2 after the first touchdown. The script was working. Everything looked good. DJU looked comfortable. It was all coming together for Florida State. And then it got into a rock fight. And that's when you see what college football teams are truly made of. And that's when you see what a team like Georgia Tech is made of. They're guys that have been overlooked for other programs. They are the second show in Atlanta. A lot more people in Atlanta are Georgia fans than Georgia Tech fans, even though Georgia's an hour out in Athens. UGA owns the state. Georgia Tech is an afterthought a lot of times. Georgia Tech is an afterthought a lot of times in the ACC. Brent Key was an afterthought. He was an interim coach that was promoted to head coach. He has a chip on his shoulder. Haynes King, their quarterback, former high-quality recruit, went to Texas A&M, didn't work out at A&M, transferred to Georgia Tech. And now Haynes King is doing his thing with the Yellow Jackets. It's a team full of guys with chip on their shoulders that know they want to beat you up in the interior. And Florida State, frankly, and I can't speak for that locker room. I don't want to dog those players' mentality, but I'm just saying what I saw on the field today. Florida State felt entitled in that game. And when Georgia Tech went up 21-14, that was the first time that you really saw urgency from FSU. DJU with a couple masterful 4th down completions on the game-tying drive that eventually made it 21-21. The middle of the field, getting his wide receivers wide open. Look, Florida State has better wide receivers and better athletes on the outside than Georgia Tech does. But Georgia Tech managed the game beautifully, won the rock fight in the trenches. They were able to run the ball. They were able to keep everything in front of them. Uiagalelei had point in average in the first half. He had a sterling stat line in the first half, right? I think it was 13 for 15 passing with an average air yards per attempt of minus 0.1. That means it's all screen games and short passing. Force Florida State to beat you down the field. And they couldn't. And every time it felt like DJU had to dial one up deep, couldn't connect on it. Was off, was outside on his throws. Had the distance right, did not have the direction right most of the time. Luckily for him, it didn't lead to picks, but it didn't lead to productive offense. And so Florida State only put 21 points up on the board. And when an underdog smells blood in the water like that, especially an underdog coach like Brent Key, they were able to grind out this game. They were able to figure out a way to get it down to the nitty-gritty, the final few minutes of the fourth quarter, put themselves in position from the left hash on the 30-yard line in Florida State territory and kick the game-winning field goal as time expired. Pandemonium ensuing. Twitter going nuts with trolling Florida State. Kirk Herbstreit, who Florida State fans very much do not like because they, for some reason, blame him for the playoff committee leaving Florida State out last year. False equivalency. I digress. But kind of an artful troll from Herbstreit, basically sending out a very encouraging message to Florida State fans on X after the game. So the memes are on fire right now. College football is fully back. We see a top 10 upset week 1, and now Florida State, the team that spent all offseason complaining about trying to get out of the ACC, suing the conference for their grant of rights, complaining that they should have been in the playoff. Everything you can possibly complain about is 0-1 to start the season, and Georgia Tech coming home with a win and now looking like a real ACC contender with Haynes King at quarterback. The seas are parting. Clemson, Miami, maybe Virginia Tech. It's your conference to win because Florida State already has a tick in the conference loss column. And remember, the top 4 teams in the playoff seedings, the 4 byes in the playoffs, are the conference champions, regardless. So Big 12, with Florida State's loss, with the highest ranked ACC team in the preseason poll losing, Big 12 could play in position for the 3 seed. Everybody's been kind of just automatically demoting the Big 12 to the 4 seed in the playoff. What if Arizona goes 10-2 or 11-1 or 11-2 or 12-1 and wins the Big 12? That's the 3 seed right now because the ACC's quote-unquote best hope. The ACC's team that was, supposed to prove that it's still here, prove that it's back, prove that it has better athletes than everybody, just lost to Georgia Tech in Ireland. So right now, point Big 12 over the ACC because the Big 12 looks like it's gunning for that 3 seed now. I think it's without a doubt that the Big 10 and the ACC, or the Big 10 and the SEC, will get the 1 and 2 seeds in the playoffs. Switch those, if you will. I think those 2 conferences are the strongest in college football, and they'll get those top 2 seeds. But that number 3 seed is up for grabs, and the ACC took a massive hit in pursuing that number 3 seed today. So point Big 12 in that realm with Georgia Tech's 24-21 walk-off win over Florida State in Dublin. All right, it's time now for the Bear Down Rundown, where we tell you what else is going on in Arizona athletics to close every show. And today we're talking about food. That's right, the Wildcats unveiled some of their new concession items to the media on Friday over at Arizona Stadium in conjunction with Aramark, and this food spread is going to be absolutely incredible. For my YouTube viewers, I'm going to play a video right now of kind of the concession items, what we're seeing there, the kind of samplers we got to see. And yeah, you got some of your classics like the pizza over there, the Sonoran dogs, but this all gets so much better. And there are so many great food options over there. Cicharo, really figuring out a way to spice up the concession items, from tamales, which were incredible. I loved the elote bites over there, which were incredible. You got the Sonoran dog, obviously a classic for Tucson, your loaded hot dogs, which are great. But you also got the Big 12 dog now, which is really cool. It's a foot-long hot dog topped with onion rings. The Bear Down burger, kind of that same twist, but a burger, it's got bacon and onion rings on top of that. That's going to be really good. So a lot of great food items over there. But the number one thing I think you need to try if you're coming to Arizona Stadium is the Sweet Ride nachos. Boy, I could have gotten 3 or 4 of those. They come in one of those little, Chinese takeout boxes. And oh my goodness, those are amazing. Just the absolute mastery confluence of flavor for a Mexican dessert. It's got churro in there. It's got the soft cinnamon sprinkled nachos. You got your chocolate drizzle on top of there. It is just delicious. It's incredible. There are so many great new options over at Arizona Stadium. You're seeing a lot of them here right now in this video. You could just have a feast over there. And I think that's something that Arizona is really excited about. They recognize this opportunity to bring a lot of new fan bases into Arizona Stadium and into McHale Center with the new Big 12 schedule this year. Athletic Director Desiree Reed-Francois talked about the importance of, being good hosts and everything like that, but also just showing people that Tucson is a foodie town. And Tucson has some of the best food in the world. It's one of the 2 cities in the United States that are UNESCO certified gastronomy cities, which is the science of food. And the other one is San Antonio. And that creates just an incredible platform to be able to experiment with different foods, with different, ethnic ingredients, everything like that. And I think that's really reflected extremely well in these new concession items. So there are too many things to name that are on that concession list right now, but go try the tamales. They're incredible. Go try the elote bites, my personal favorite, the sweet ride nachos, and everything, maybe not the sweet ride nachos, but everything you can top with the Los Gatos hot sauce. So it's going to be a great time if you're eating over at Arizona Stadium. Don't fill up too much on hot dogs at the tailgate. Don't fill up too much on beer over at Dirtbags. Instead, save some of that for concessions at Arizona Stadium or McHale once we get there later in the season, because you're going to be eating good this year. It's a step up. It's a massive step up, and it should be, really, really fun to see kind of the reception around all of this new food and see what they do to kind of experiment and continue to improve and diversify some of these menu items, because concessions, from what people have told me, is an ever-changing battle, ever-changing competition. And boy, Cicharo is doing the most with that. Aramark as well. And Arizona Athletics is welcoming in all of these new ideas to really enhance the fan experience over there at Arizona Stadium, McHale Center, and all the venues at the U of A. So I'm going to play this video one more time I'm playing this video one more time as we kind of wrap up this segment and wrap up the show, because it looks too good. It tastes even better than it looks. So if you want to try it, next Saturday, season opener, Arizona Stadium. Boy, that feels good to say, right? We're 1 week away from football. We've got a week full of previews coming up for Arizona's opener against New Mexico over there at Arizona Stadium. 7:30 p.m. kickoff on ESPN. And in Tucson, kicking off under the lights, the 2024 season, the Brent Brennan era, the Big 12 debut for the Wildcats. That all kicks off next weekend. Should be extremely exciting, and we'll have your full pre-game coverage all week long on the Bleav in Arizona podcast, and then, of course, all your coverage on game day as well on my socials at Matt_Reynoldson, and, of course, a post-game podcast from all that we saw from the stadium on night 1 of the season. Exciting week coming up. That's it for this podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you later this week on the Bleav in Arizona podcast.